now with the rise of AI, everyone's adding that agents MD file. It's been 4 years and it still nags on me, and I want to do a breaking change just to remove it.
Wait, are you a Java developer?
I'm not. No.
Welcome to Making Software, the podcast where we have real conversations about building better software. In today's episode, we're going to discuss a different side of engineering, and it's the side where your users are actually other engineers as well. Today's guest is no stranger to this. He's been building APIs, SDKs, and making sure to offer a great developer experience for the past years. Raghd Hamzeh is a senior software engineer at Okta, and is also one of the core maintainers of OpenFGA, an open source authorization solution that allows developers to build granular access control through the use of their APIs and SDKs. So let's begin.
Welcome.
Hi.
How are you doing?
Doing great. This new year, new me, new everything.
Literally, I know. So I know you've been working at Okta for a while, but do you want to give us a little bit of context and background about what you've been up to for the past years?
Yeah, absolutely. I joined Okta, actually All0 before it became Okta, around a bit less than 5 years ago, for the fine-grained authorization initiative. At first, it was more of a, I don't want to say research, but like MVP, very early project. And at some point, we decided to open source it and make it part of OpenFGA. At that, part of my kind of responsibilities were more on the community side and the tooling developer side. Like, how do we get people to understand what FGA is? Why do they need it? How do they use it? And how to make integrations with it easier, like calling it, how do they know best practices, things like this. It's been almost 5 years now, but still that idea of, it's not just we want to build something that works, we want to set something that is easy to understand, especially in the authorization space. Like if anyone misunderstands something, that could be a security issue. So how do we make it let people understand what they're doing, are able to test and verify what they're doing, and do this easily, like onboard very easily, like have things being seamless.
Yeah, and that's basically what we want to talk in today's episode. Everything from building SDKs, API, or any tool that will help the overall developer experience in the end. And I think you as you mentioned, you have a lot of experience in that field. You went from backend engineering to kind of like more developer experience, although I think they're kind of like related.
They're related also. I worked mostly in startups before, which help at least being close to the user mindset. So it's not always developers, but it's all like trying to see things from the perspective of the person who's going to end up using this. This really helps getting into DX. This was my first DX focused job, where I'm building tools for developers and not for end users or end companies. But that mentality of being close to the product or being close to the folks using this really helps the shift, in making this shift.
Have you noticed a big change in the mindset? Because you were saying you were closer to the user mindset, now you're building tools for developers. But have you noticed like a different, I don't know, maybe we can call it persona or like characteristics from this user mindset and the developer mindset?
In a way, this is easier because I'm a developer. So the way I do it is, especially even more in OpenFGA than with All0FGA. The idea, I am a consumer of so many open source software. So how I interact with the community is generally I try to think when I go open an issue or when I try to go report, what are my frustrations? What are things I want to see happening? When I want to read the docs, integrate. So it helps, it makes it way easier to get into that mindset. That's it. Are we there? No, we're not, definitely not. We haven't figured everything out. We have you have the constraints of time, but it helps at least in terms of putting your headspace in terms of someone who has to use this becomes much easier. And like trying to target, I think we'll talk about it, but like there's also the problem here is like you have way different skill levels or context for people joining. Some people joining who know what they want to do and they just like, okay, I want to do this and just give me that point. And people have no context, and that's a different different mentality too. So it's struggling between those. It's really an interesting space, trying to cater to all the needs.
And you also mentioned you were working on documentation as well. I guess especially in the beginnings of OpenFGA, for example. But now talking about the beginner and the, let's call them the expert who already knows what they want to do. How do you think we can keep a balance of, I'm going to provide you with this documentation, but I want it to be valuable for both of you?
That's a good question. And you can see kind of the shift. We sometimes go overboard one way or another, depending on like the reviewers and who's writing. Some folks prefer the more like I'm just going to give the SDKs, for example. On every snippet to put in all the imports, how do you initialize it? I, on the other hand, feel that's like I'm scrolling too much to just get like, oh, that one little piece of info I need. And we keep hearing reports both ways. When we do this, people like no, this is becoming frustrating. When we do that, this is becoming confusing. And generally, what sometimes we try to do is to keep things available but hidden, as in like maybe in a collapsible piece. Like, okay, this is the content. You'll see it a lot in docs where like, okay, this is the authorization model. These are like, this is what a type means. This is what a user means. For repeat users, they don't want to read this every single time, but it gives the folks who really are just stumbled on that page a bit of a context to try to understand, okay, what are these terms that folks are using here without having to go to looking in a different page.
Yeah, I like that approach, especially because for example, I'm the kind of learner that when I'm going through a piece of documentation, I'm going to go straight to what I want. I will try it, but then when it doesn't work, because a lot of times I miss something or whatever, I will have to go back to the docs and be like, okay, let me just read what I ignored because I thought I knew it. So I like the idea of having that collapsible or yeah, as a way of informing me of the things that I wanted to ignore. And then in the end, I needed it, actually. I think another topic in the world of developer experience, and one that for context for anyone watching, me and Raghd have been working on lately. I was working on building a Ruby SDK for a couple of months ago. And we ran into many conversations of how do we make this more idiomatic for Ruby, for example, which is already a very opinionated community. I say that because I am one of those opinionated people. So we had a lot of, how do we make it more idiomatic? How do we adapt this more for the Ruby developer and whatnot? And I think this is probably one of the biggest pain points or topics that I've seen around any developer tool out there. Sometimes you would go and they would have an SDK or a library only for, I don't know, these 5 specific languages or frameworks. And then you would find yourself kind of like, okay, do I use it? Do I, implement this new feature with this new language? What do I do? So I'm wondering from the builder perspective, how do you decide, okay, we're going to support this amount of languages, or this is what we're going to provide, this is what we're going to maintain? Because I think that's one of the topics that from both sides you probably have encountered.
That's definitely a hard topic that we're still figuring out, especially like who you're building for, or who you have to keep in mind are not just the people using. So you have folks who are don't care about any of the internals. I want an SDK, I want to use it. So you do want to care for the DX for them. But you'll also have the contributors, the people who like, hey, I'm a Java developer, I'm a Ruby developer, I'm a Go developer, who jump in, provide really valuable effort and time and skills but don't really care about the ecosystem or what I'm a Go developer. I don't care what the Ruby SDK does. I care about fixing it here. And then you have kind of us, the maintainership team. How do we maintain SDKs and languages we don't understand? Even now we have 5 SDKs. I'm not a pro in 5 different languages. So how do we try to keep this manageable for us so that those honestly very helpful contributors who do contribute one language or one improvement, we're able to build on top for an extended period of time. So it when they leave, because they've done what they needed to do, when they move to the next project, it's not left languishing in terms of an SDK that now is not maintained anymore. And you have to balance all of this with ultimately the folks who are deciding on how much time can you invest, and ultimately the company needs. So there's a lot of balance there and shift there, and we've discussed a lot of things. One recently we've been discussing maybe we have a tiered platform. This is what something OpenTelemetry does, where we have so many SDKs, but these are community SDKs. We don't promise support. You use them at your own risk. And we are considering something like this, or maybe we have okay, these are platinum tier, these are gold tier. And how do you support more? We have to balance usage. How many people are using them? For example, Go and JS are some of the 2 of the most used. It's very unlikely we're going to ignore them. But also, who do you have as developers? So if we have a contributor who's super passionate about Ruby, okay, now it's easy, the cost for us is less. So long as we factor how long is this contributor or maintainer available. You don't want to reach a time where now we're good, but in a year's time we're not so good. And that is really a hard balance. Trying that drives a lot of the kind of decision making around sometimes not going down the optimal path for some of these folks. Sometimes from a DX perspective, it's not great, or from a contributor perspective, it's not great. But we're trying to balance the long-term health. The ideal would be if none of us is, if I'm not here anymore, if you're not here anymore, or we moved on to a different, lovely, amazing project that's different from this, the thing would not stall. The people do not need to learn every language to get context. They can look at one language, understand what it is, how we build things, and be able to move across SDKs fairly seamlessly. Some of the things that help are consistency, trying to maintain a consistent interface, and automation. The more we can automate and the more we can auto-generate, and the more consistent we are, the less effort it is to maintain. So basically now you need to have one context, which is how that works, and then you can add as many SDKs as you want, and the core is still the same. That said, that comes with a lot of negatives, because now people need to understand that kind of custom thing that I'm a Java developer. I'm not used to this. This is not how I write software. I can do way better if you just give me all the leeway to build you the best Java SDK, and that's absolutely true.
Wait, are you a Java developer?
I'm not. No.
Okay, I was I'm just finding this out right now.
I'm I guess Go, JS, and a bit of recently .NET, but Go and JS probably are my main 2.
I was thinking when you were talking about generating and switching context between SDKs or languages, that's probably a very tough call to make. From my point of view, as let's assume I'm a user, right? I'm someone who wants to use one of the SDKs. The decision is easier probably because I'm probably going to use the SDK of the language that I'm most familiar with, or the one that the language that my company is using, or something like that. So that decision is kind of made already. And then in times where you do have to switch context and decide to go to another SDK, how do you provide that consistency and make sure that the experience is, I'm not going to say equal, but very similar across all of the SDKs?
this is again something that we haven't fully figured out yet. The idea is trying to maintain some of the consistent balance in terms of both the feature set. So we add support for a feature in the Go SDK, we have to add it in the Ruby SDK. We have to add it in like all these others. And but also as in terms of DX. So if we name something X here, we don't name it Y here. That said, we still don't want to make it like unfamiliar territory for someone who is a Ruby developer. Like we don't want them to come and look at this and like, what is this code? So you have to strike the balance. We haven't done a great job, to be honest. Like we have like maybe I see this more than often than others, but sometimes I see like we made a typo and we called something differently in Python and JS, and it's been 4 years and it still nags on me, and I want to do a breaking change just to remove it. But of course, we don't want to be too like, okay, this is the interface, we'll always use it. So it's more of, this is the rough interface. Like you'll always, for example, you've seen it now in the client, we try to go like body and options. Body is like what you think about like not optional, or like the things that are concerned this request. Options are more of what the request does, or like something that like you want to override something, headers, something like this goes into option. We're trying this paradigm. It's somewhat working. We tried it across SDKs. Is it gonna be?
We're talking about the way you pass parameters to a method in the SDKs, right?
Yeah, and that one, like, I don't know if it's gonna work long term. That's another thing. We made so many decisions that were great at the time. 1 year later, you realize, okay, we've either outgrown it or we have more data, and now it's a limiting factor. And it may turn out this is another one of those. But for now, it's working. But it's not, when we say that, it's not, doesn't mean everything has to fit in it. Again, going back to Go, it does add the context. It doesn't fit in any of those. Or in .NET, the cancellation token does not fit in any of those. So those are kind of like, we're trying to both fit in every language a bit, as well as provide a consistent interface. Another idea, we don't have it yet, but it's possible. We always have the chance to offer different, like both a consistent interface for those who want it, and a more like idiomatic approach for those who prefer it. That is more maintenance, but at some point, if we find like there's a lot of pushback or people are not liking what we're providing, it's always a possibility that we're gonna lean more towards trying to maintain too, especially like so long as the internals are the same, maintaining the interface should be less of an effort. Yeah.
Now that you mentioned that part of providing a tool for some users and this other for some other users, I'm thinking of the case, how do you decide how much you want the user to be able to control in an SDK? And the reason I ask this is because in the case of OpenFGA, if you wanted to do it yourself, you will have to make a bunch of HTTP calls to this API and, figure it out yourself, which some people are willing to do. I do think a lot of other people would rather just have a tool like any of the SDKs to provide a better way to do it. But yeah, I'm just wondering, how do you handle that?
I think the end result is always you start somewhat simple or with some opinions, basically. And then you try to go towards a more modular approach where people can use parts of your SDK and compose something better. We are starting to build that with the new, we're introducing the whole like raw executor, the request builder basically approach. The reason for that is actually not just this, it's because sometimes we build something on one SDK and we don't have time to build it on all others, and we don't want people to wait. So that they can go the raw approach and just give us, okay, this is the body, this is the URL, and they still get the observability, the retries, the token exchange. So that is one way, but the other is even those, maybe some folks don't want to use our observability, want to use their own. Maybe some folks want to use like the native language retry system, not our retry. I think as we mature, like a few years down the line, we'd have it more composable. So if you want to build some, like use some of the logic or some of the features on SDK, but you're a pro enough that you know what you want to use and you actually want to use other features from other kind of libraries, you should be able to take some of the logic we've helped you build, not have to rebuild it, but still have the flexibility of using like other tools. Again, that is not something that we're building right now, but I think as we grow, as we mature, it's probably going to be something that we're going to aim for, because our user base will grow and their needs will grow. So us trying to cater to all the needs is not going to be very likely. And from opinions, not everyone, like if you want to cater for someone who, like if you want to cater for consistency, not everyone's going to like that.
Yeah.
If you want to cater for idiomatic approach, not everyone's going to like that. So at some point we'll be like, okay, we did our what we think is the best, or in these circumstances you don't want this, we're not telling you no, we just have to do a bit more work to customize it for your personal like preferences.
And how do you make the decision of putting, for example, the community or what the community wants versus the health of the platform that you're building? Because I imagine that a scenario must have happened at some point.
Yes, and I think generally you want to try to focus more on the health of the platform, because it's also for the benefit of the user. Doing one thing now and being stuck with it, even though it may seem like it fulfills your particular use case, if it affects development, affects the stability of the platform, you're going to be affected in the long term. Generally, we try to be, okay, does this make sense? On the SDK front, we have it so much easier, because worst case, you deprecate, we release like 2.0, people still be able to use them. It's much harder on the server side, because we're not like deprecating an API is much harder than the SDK. So we do have it easier, and we've done that. And we do have a lot of breaking change. We're less than 1.0 for a reason, because we wanted that flexibility. We haven't reached a point where we feel confident this is what we have, this is what we want to continue with. But we do spend, honestly, a ton of effort and time thinking about those breaking changes, to the extent where sometimes it's annoying for other people. We're like, this feature is so nice to have, or this refactor is so nice to have, but no, it's a breaking change. So there's our focus on like, how do we not break things, and how do we, when we're building the features, for example, on the SDKs, we prefer to build them on the SDKs first before the API. It gives us a way of experimentation. Examples of that is client-side batch check. We didn't used to have batch check on the API for the longest time. We recently introduced it, but we did still want people to benefit from the X of, they don't have to do the parallelization themselves. We'll do it for them. So we introduced client-side batch check, and it proved like very helpful. A lot of people used it. It did end up costing us, because at some point we had to do a breaking change, because now there's an OpenFGA server that has batch check, but as an SDK, we have no idea who's using that server or who's using an older server. So we had to provide them still with both. So it is a hassle, but the X there was, one, do your learnings from the SDK first before the API, because it's much easier to iterate, much easier for the end users for breaking changes, because they can either pin, if it changes, like the model, you can notice it easier, because your code doesn't compile anymore. So it's easier to notice rather than an API change. So try there. And in some cases where we feel we're not there yet, an example with that would be transactions. You'll see as you were building the transactions on Write. Again, that's another place where we started from the SDK. Now we upstreamed a very small part of it to the API. We hope that's actually the most essential part that people are going to need. But it's tricky, because a lot of people wanted the API first. And yes, it made so much the X sense. Like, it provides such a better experience. But there's always the fear of, what if it affects stability or security or performance, that you have to keep in mind. It's a very hard challenge, and it's not something you will get right, and everyone's going to be disappointed at one point or another, but you try your best.
That's
And another thing also maybe we haven't done a great job, but we try to do is try to be transparent. Like, it's not like we don't want to do this because we're assholes. We're trying not to do this because we still, like, we want to make sure we can maintain this, that this is something that would benefit us in the long term. And generally, people understand.
Yeah, I mean, and in the end, I think the whole point of building any kind of software, and I honestly, one of the
Yes.
ideas behind this podcast even is to understand that, like we're still just humans trying to build something that is usable and maintainable and that you will enjoy using. So I resonate with that a lot, really. Before we wrap up, I have a question for you. If there's an engineer, a developer right now listening to us, and they're also building a tool for other developers, what would you tell them to change or to add or to stop doing in order to improve even a 10% the developer experience of that tool?
I think one that would be great is to lay out your expectations and make sure they understand what their expectations can be. So, hey, we're going to review this in 3 weeks. It's not wrong, but make sure they understand that. But also lay out your expectation, because that will help. Do you want in a particular commits should be structured in a particular way? Do you want the explanation? Do you want an issue before you submit the PR? Make sure like your expectations are clear. Make sure their expectations are well set. And actually, the third thing is something now with the rise of AI, everyone's adding that agents MD file. But remove AI for a side. Write that file for contributors and for yourself. Because usually in that file, you write, okay, this is how I do things. This is how we structure things. This is our architecture. Great. I want to know it. So I think starting from there, like, it seems silly. Like, yeah, that's such a small thing. As a contributor, it helps when I'm contributing. And as a maintainer, it helps that I don't have to explain that. Like, a lot of time you struggle when you want to tell people, like, hey, you did X, you put this much effort on this, but it's not great. Or like, I would rather it be a bit different. So it'll be nice if you can upfront all of these small non-develop or non-major decisions, and make sure like all of that is already available for people to do.
I like that. I think it definitely helps out both ways. You know what to expect. I know how to help you, like in building this faster. So it totally makes sense. Well, thank you very much, Raghd, for joining me today in this episode.
Easy.
And thank you to everyone watching or listening. This was another episode of Making Software, the podcast where we have real conversations about building better software. See you next month. Bye.
Thanks, Carla. Bye.